Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, February 28th, 2022, and tomorrow we start the official 2022 midterm primary election season with the state of Texas beginning their brand new primaries that are set to occur tomorrow and then again in the end of May for their runoff elections. With that start of our official 2022 season, I decided today to take a look at the numeric difference between President Joe Biden's approval rating and the Republican Party's margin of victory nationwide. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I made a video about a week ago talking about a major voting problem that the Republican Party had, essentially exposing that the GOP was consistently falling behind. When it came down to approval ratings of Biden, Biden may have been disapproved of, but the Republicans didn't necessarily have to be up. The numbers showing Biden down did not directly correlate to a Republican Party victory. And that's where you really see some major concerns here for many members of the Republican Party, that Biden can be down -14, but they can be up no more than 4 nationwide. And in today's video, we are actually going to put a number to it, and that number is about a 10 to 11 point difference between President Biden's job approval rating and the Republican Party's margin of victory on the generic ballot. And this also might tell us something later down the line if President Biden's approval rating is to recover. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things here. We're going to talk about COVID-19. We're going to talk about foreign policy. We're going to talk about different things that impact the outcome of our upcoming 2022 midterm elections. And all that we need to understand so far is that the Republican Party is significantly lagging behind when it comes down to the generic congressional vote relative to President Joe Biden's approval rating. So, like I said, I've been telling you this for quite some time now, but I think that you can start to see some very clear results from some of these polls. More recently, ABC News and the Washington Post, an A-plus rated pollster, released numbers from the nationwide scale, showing that Joe Biden was disapproved of 19 points more than he was approved of across the nation. 57% of the nation disapproved of Joe Biden, whereas just 38% approved. And you'd think Joe Biden being in the high 30s is bad. I mean, that is the lowest that Donald Trump was. I think the lowest ever was 34. But, 34 to 38, not much of a difference there. And with Biden being down so much, you might be thinking, knowing the 2010 midterms, knowing the 2014 midterms, that type of energy and enthusiasm against the president always results in opposition party turnout. But that's not necessarily the case in this result. What we are finding is that in that same ABC News Washington Post poll, the Republican Party is only up 7 points. That is the third highest number that we have received. The other ones being Emerson and Rasmussen reports. We're probably going to throw out Rasmussen reports for the sake of this video because we're not going to talk too intently about that. But the ABC News poll, the Washington Post poll, showing about a 12-point fall off between those who disapprove of Biden and those who are voting between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats are getting more vote share there than Joe Biden is approved. So what does that tell you? As we continue down, you are also going to see this. For instance, Harvard-Harris, they did a poll, -17 nationwide for President Biden, Republicans only up by 2. Keep in mind, this is the same group. These are the same voters. These are not separate polls. These are not separate voting groups. So possibly, there could be some type of discrepancy there. These are the same exact people they are polling when it comes down to President Biden's approval rating, and they are still only showing the Republican Party ahead by 2. And this continues. You take a look at Fox News, -13 for Fox News on the generic congressional ballot. Republicans up by 4, a 9-point fall off. What you are finding is that nearly on a very consistent average, while Biden may be disapproved of, you are still seeing the Democrats come further ahead than Biden. Even more notably, in the polls from Politico Morning Consult, -8 for Biden. In the generic ballot, Democrats up by 4. That's where you start to see some very major differences, some very big things really changing here. Economist YouGov, Democrats +6, but on Joe Biden's approval, down 6, a 12-point difference. The numbers become increasingly more clear. A 10 to 12-point difference between President Biden's approval rating and the Republican Party's ability to win, which actually gives the Democratic Party quite some good news. And not good news because right now they currently are poised to lose both control of the Senate and the House of Representatives, but more so that if they have time to recover, that could end up benefiting the Democratic Party later down the line. We are reaching about a point where Joe Biden has been disapproved of more than he has been approved of in terms of his entire presidency. That happened for Barack Obama right around this time in his first term. But what we are going to find, or it began happening right around this time. It didn't actually happen yet, but then it ended up lasting through that first term. what we can find is that with the new crisis in Ukraine, Joe Biden might actually end up benefiting from it. Now, in no way am I trying to compare a Russian invasion to any type of, political event, as if this is some type of, Democratic National Convention that is going to prop up Joe Biden. I am merely going to analyze the impact of a major global event such as this, where you would tend to see some consolidation behind a president. And if President Biden plays hardball, as about 70% of Americans want him to do, he might start to see an uptick in approval. He's not at 70% right now. And that's where there is going to be potentially some benefit for the Democratic Party. And, looking at the approval rating for foreign policy, right now Biden is down 19 points on average. What's to say that him potentially harming Russia and going through Ukraine could result in a change in that overall average? What you could find is that Joe Biden could be approved of, in some regard, or at least some type of significant improvement, right? You're looking at a possibility where the Democratic Party currently is down, Joe Biden is down, and being down 19 points in foreign policy definitely doesn't help. So that could change, potentially even overnight, and that's just the way that American politics works. Looking further into the public approval rating and the handling of the coronavirus, you could also see some changes here, and not necessarily because of Ukraine for obvious reasons, but more so because of the lessened restrictions across the nation. When you take a look at the CDC new guidances, what you are going to find is that the current standing and the current precedent that has been set was that indoor masking was required, or at least recommended, in 95% of areas across the nation. Right now, that has been reduced to just 26%. So in reducing it to 26%, you are going to find that Americans are probably going to be at least happier about this case. Even though there is that major point to be made that, trusting the science is there, that recognizing concern and recognizing worry. If the CDC is coming out and saying you no longer need to wear a mask, it's very similar to that very brief, different time period in the summer of 2021 where nearly every single state, in fact, I think every single state at that time, had dropped their mask mandate. Some states have returned it, but now a lot of these things are going to expire. I mean, literally here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we are set to expire our indoor mask mandate on March 13th, 2022. That is 2 weeks away. This is probably one of the most liberal parts of the nation, and they are dropping their mask mandate. And they're doing so because COVID cases are down. And if people are happier about COVID, when they're prompted with this question, they're going to start to say they approve. The same way they did when the mask mandates dropped originally. When Biden was put into office, he was super high in numbers when it came down to the coronavirus, and that was really keeping him above water, and it started to chip down. But immediately after the mandate started to come back into full effect, right after and right in the start of Thanksgiving, right in the start of a surge of Omicron cases, regardless if it was his fault or not, it doesn't matter. The American public will always blame the person at the top of the ticket. They will always blame the person in the most control across the nation, and that is President Biden. But if COVID cases become a thing of the past, if people stop testing, if people stop wearing masks, they will view it as a return to normalcy. And that's where that -11, -12 drop-off is really harmful for the GOP. Because anytime Biden increases, he could be bringing the Democratic Party back up with him. And that's exactly what happened when Biden was there. Now, this 12-point drop-off isn't always going to be there, which means that if Joe Biden is approved of by 10 points tomorrow, it doesn't mean the Democrats will be up 22. It just seems to be whenever the Republican Party is in the lead and Biden is disapproved of, that's where the drop-off seems to be coming about. But there was a time in which the Democratic Party was up nationwide at their highest point, about 7 points on the national average, but this did coincide with President Biden being approved of by plus 10 points or more, which meant that at this point in American politics, Democrats were actually underperforming President Biden. So it's a bit tricky in terms of a situation itself. There isn't a perfect number every single time, but what we have seen so far since the Republican Party has taken the lead, taken the advantage when it comes down to the generic ballot, is that you're seeing about an 11 to 12 point drop off, which is pretty significant if you ask me. So overall, I think that, looking at President Biden's approval rating, looking at the generic ballot, we are going to see the Republican Party nearly always underperform their numbers. I think there are very few exceptions when it comes down to the Republican Party being further ahead than they are in terms of President Biden's approval rating. I think maybe that Emerson poll that shows Joe Biden down 8 points shows the Republican Party up 9 points. And that's really an anomaly. Looking at the rest of the pollsters, looking at the rest of the polling numbers, you are consistently finding that Biden is doing worse in the job approval rating than the Democrats are in the generic ballot. And that's just typically how it goes. But we haven't really seen it to this level. So if Democrats are to recover in terms of their overall approval rating, or at least Joe Biden is to some extent, what could that mean for the Senate elections? What could that mean for potentially the House elections? Well, first things first, that I want to recognize that the Democratic Party is going to surpass their amount of seats won in our new maps than in their old maps. Even though the Republican Party had a 100-seat advantage when it came down to more House districts being drawn, the Democratic Party is still coming out ahead. So keep that in mind when you look at the House map. While Republicans are still very much poised to win control of the House in 2022, it's not some type of electoral landslide what they had in 2010 when they won 63 seats from the Democratic Party. They'd be lucky to get more than 20. And looking at the Senate elections, again, what could we expect to see? Probably nothing worse than this. Truly speaking, the Democratic Party is going to be put in a position where they could very well hold on to a state like Pennsylvania, hold on to New Hampshire, potentially pick up Pennsylvania, given the circumstances around the nominee for Senate and governor there. Looking at the Senate map here, while the GOP is probably going to be ahead, they probably will remain in control. The Democratic Party could up some of their chances. No worse than this if they are to at least somewhat bounce that approval rating back up further and further to a point where potentially Democrats could take the lead in the generic ballot. And if Democrats are to recover in a way, let's say because of Ukraine or COVID-19 or a bunch of other issues that impact the American public, you are going to see potentially a map similar to this one, where you would see maybe some moving around where Pennsylvania, Wisconsin are going red, but Arizona and Nevada are going blue, or potentially, New Hampshire also going blue in this case. So it's 51-49. You're talking about a mix between these two maps, right? And I know they seem to be very much polar opposites. You're seeing 4 different states shift from left to right, But what you are going to find is that you might find a perfect medium there, which actually could end up benefiting the Democratic Party. We have been working under this assumption that Joe Biden's disapproval rating is automatically going to hand the Democratic Party a defeat. And while right now that may individually be correct, it isn't correct to the same extent. A -10 approval rating might be enough to give Democrats control of the Senate again. A -5 approval rating could be enough for Democrats to potentially hold control of the House of Representatives. Because this map has been so gerrymandered and the Democratic Party has come out ahead, the Republican Party really messed up. They truly could have gone much more vicious when it came down to these maps, the same way they did for the past 10 years. They decided to be more relaxed, or maybe they didn't necessarily decide to be more relaxed, but they were forced to be more relaxed by state Supreme Courts as shown in Ohio and North Carolina. And I think that's where the GOP really fell flat on their face. And ultimately, this means that the Democratic Party could potentially win the generic ballot nationwide. They were able to win control of the old House with a 3-point victory nationwide. What if they were to win by 4 points? Under the old map, it would have been more difficult. Under this new map, it's actually easier. The old map only gave them a majority of 5. This new map would give them a majority of 8 to 10, potentially even more if they were to win by the exact same margin when it came down to states, when it came down to these congressional districts. When you look at the increase in Biden districts already, they're talking about 6 to 8 districts already off the bat, with non-confirmations coming from Ohio, where Democrats are expected to gain, where you are going to see Democrats maintain the status quo or potentially veto it in Louisiana and potentially benefit, where they're going to maintain the status quo in Missouri, where they're going to maintain the status quo in Wisconsin, and very likely in Florida. So the Democratic Party doesn't look like they are going to be set to lose any type of major losses. And when you take a look at the change from the old maps, what you are finding is that there are 12 increased Democratic-leaning seats. And this is where the GOP should be very worried. That 11 to 12 point drop off truly means so much. It could make all the difference when it comes down to partisan control at the end of this upcoming November midterms, and it could put the Republican Party in a much more beneficial position if they were to actually correlate and connect their disapproval of Biden to Republican Party votes. I've said it before, though. I do think that there are leftists, liberals, etc., that do disapprove of Joe Biden. There are plenty of people on the left who would like to criticize. The same way under President Trump, his approval rating never correlated to the amount that the Republican Party was going to lose by. While it did end up showing that they were going to lose, the same way I expect Democrats to lose in November, if Trump was to recover the way he nearly did in 2020, Republicans could get a lot closer. They could at least, Democrats could, get a lot closer if Biden was to replicate what Trump did. What Donald Trump did in 2020 was resurge that support, bring himself to 45% approval, and he was 44,000 votes away from winning the presidency. At different points in his entire career, he was down 20 points nationwide. Now, looking at the numbers back in November, he played the game correctly. leading up to the election, he was able to recover his approval, and his party benefited from it. They won every single race that mattered when it came down to redistricting. We might know that, if that wasn't to happen, the Democrats might have been able to expand even further when it came down to their House map. So it is quite interesting to see. All around, this drop-off is a pretty bad look for the GOP and does need to be addressed. But as of right now, I don't see any way that they connect the approval rating for Biden into the generic ballot, especially as we now engulf ourselves into a world crisis and potentially another war in Europe. I think that, not necessarily potentially a war in Europe, but in terms of involvement from the United States, potentially another one, which is a daunting thought, but it is a very real one that we are now working in our standard political world, and especially on the international level. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.